This is a deep dive from IsReal News. Israel, Iran, and the limits of a nuclear deal. What's at stake in the new talks? The United States and Iran have restarted nuclear negotiations, and Israel is watching closely. The renewed talks are raising a core question for Israeli leaders: whether a new agreement would reduce Iran's long-term threat or relieve pressure on Tehran while leaving key capabilities intact. The latest round began in Oman on Friday, in talks described by multiple outlets as indirect, with Omani mediation and U.S. and Iranian delegations meeting over several hours. Both sides signaled interest in continuing. U.S. officials have framed the discussions around capping Iran's nuclear program and averting a wider regional confrontation. Iranian officials have said the talks must include sanctions relief and have stressed that Iran will not accept demands that end all enrichment on Iranian soil. Israel's concern, as described by Israeli political and security reporting in recent days, is that a narrow deal could focus mainly on the nuclear file, while leaving Iran's missile program and regional network of armed partners largely untouched. For Jerusalem, those issues are not separate. Israeli officials have long treated the missile program and proxy support as central to Iran's deterrence and power projection, even as the nuclear program remains the highest stakes element. That framing is now part of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's agenda as he prepares to meet President Donald Trump in Washington this week. Israeli statements previewing the meeting have emphasized several points Israel wants to see in any U.S.-Iran arrangement: limits that prevent Iran from sustaining a large-scale enrichment capability, intrusive monitoring and verification, and constraints on ballistic missiles and support for armed groups across the region. Iran's position, meanwhile, has been publicly consistent on two fronts. Iranian leaders describe uranium enrichment as a sovereign right and have signaled willingness to negotiate over levels and oversight, but not to accept a permanent ban on enrichment. On missiles, Iranian officials have repeatedly indicated that the ballistic missile program is not up for negotiation. For Israel, that matters, because missiles are the delivery system that can threaten population centers and strategic sites, and because missiles and drones have been used by Iran and its regional partners in multiple theaters. The talks are also taking place against the backdrop of heightened military readiness. The United States has increased force posture in the region, including carrier and air deployments that U.S. officials describe as deterrence and reassurance. That posture is part of the negotiating environment. It signals that Washington is keeping the possibility of military action in view, even while pursuing diplomacy. Israeli reporting adds another layer to the concern: timing. Israeli officials have argued for years that extended negotiations can work to Tehran's advantage because they can slow outside pressure while Iran preserves core capabilities. In that view, the key risk is not only what a final agreement allows, but also how long talks run, what interim understandings emerge, and how quickly sanctions relief arrives. Sanctions are central because they shape Iran's capacity. When restrictions ease, Iran can expand trade, increase oil and gas revenue, and stabilize the domestic economy. Supporters of a deal argue that verification and caps can reduce nuclear risk and lower the chance of war. Critics argue that large financial inflows can also strengthen Iran's military-industrial base and its ability to fund allied armed groups, even if the nuclear program is partially constrained. This is where the Israeli and American political calendars also matter. For President Trump, a renewed nuclear framework could be presented as a diplomatic achievement and a means of preventing escalation. For Netanyahu, the stakes include both national security policy and political credibility after years of warnings about Iran. Israeli leaders are weighing how to preserve operational freedom if the United States signs an agreement that emphasizes de-escalation and regional calm. Operational freedom is a recurring concept in Israeli defense planning. Israel has sought to retain the ability to act independently against emerging threats, especially if intelligence indicates accelerating nuclear activity or rapid advances in delivery systems. Israeli analysts worry that once Washington signs a deal and publicly frames it as stabilizing the region, independent Israeli action could carry heavier political costs, including direct friction with the White House and diplomatic fallout with European partners aligned with the agreement. At the same time, there are structural constraints on military options. Senior U.S. officials and military planners have repeatedly emphasized that strikes are not a substitute for a durable political strategy, especially if an operation does not achieve clear, rapid results. In any scenario, Iran retains the ability to respond through direct missile and drone attacks, maritime disruption, or actions by aligned groups in the region. Gulf states also remain wary of escalation that could threaten energy infrastructure and shipping lanes. So the current moment is a three-part test. First, scope. Will negotiations address only nuclear limits, or also missiles and regional armed networks? Second, sequencing. How quickly would sanctions relief arrive, and what mechanisms would exist to reimpose penalties if Iran violates terms? Third, verification and durability. What inspection regime would be in place, what enrichment thresholds would apply, and whether constraints would hold across political transitions in Washington. What comes next is likely to move on two tracks at once. Diplomatically, U.S. and Iranian teams are expected to continue talks, with Oman maintaining a mediating role and both sides signaling that further meetings are possible. Politically, Netanyahu's Washington meetings will test whether the United States is prepared to widen the negotiating agenda or maintain a narrower focus. For listeners, the core issue is straightforward. This is not only a debate about one nuclear agreement, it is a debate about what problem diplomacy is trying to solve. The nuclear program alone, or the broader system of capabilities that Iran uses to deter, threaten, and project power. We will be watching for the agenda and timetable of the next round of talks, any public signals on missiles and proxies, and any indication of how sanctions relief and verification would be structured. Those details will determine whether an agreement changes the strategic balance or shifts it. You've been listening to a deep dive from IsReal News.